The small town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, awoke to a crisp autumn morning on October 17th, 1991. Fog clung to the rolling hills surrounding the community, where everyone knew each other by name, and most families had lived for generations. The fall colors were at their peak, vibrant reds and golds, painting the landscape as residents went about their morning routines. Among them was 36-year-old Michael Harrigan, a respected firefighter with the Millbrook Volunteer Fire Department for over 15 years. That morning, Michael kissed his wife Sarah goodbye, as he always did. "See you tonight," he said with a smile, heading out to his shift at the firehouse. Their two children, Emma, 10, and Jason, 8, were still asleep, a typical Thursday in the Harrigan household. Michael grabbed his travel mug of coffee and walked out to his blue 1988 Ford pickup truck parked in the driveway of their modest two-story home. What no one knew then was that this would be the last normal morning the Harrigans, and indeed the entire town of Millbrook, would experience for decades to come. When Michael failed to arrive for his shift at the firehouse, his colleagues thought little of it at first. Perhaps he had stopped to help someone on the road. It wouldn't have been out of character for the man known throughout town for his willingness to lend a hand. By noon, however, concern began to set in. Calls to the Harrigan home went unanswered. Sarah was at her job as a nurse at Millbrook General Hospital, and the children were at school. Fire Chief Robert Thornton, who had known Michael since high school, drove to the Harrigan residence during his lunch break. Michael's truck wasn't there. No sign of disturbance, nothing that would indicate anything amiss. Yet the knot in Thornton's stomach tightened. "He's never missed a shift without calling in. Not once in 15 years, Thornton would later tell police. By evening, Sarah Harrigan stood in her kitchen, the phone receiver clutched in her white-knuckled hand as she reported her husband missing to police. Outside, the sky had turned a deep indigo, the temperature dropping as night fell. Inside, fear crept into the Harrigan home like a slow-moving fog. The next morning, a Friday, Michael's blue Ford was discovered abandoned at Hawks Peak, a scenic overlook about 7 miles outside of town. The keys were still in the ignition. His wallet sat on the passenger seat, driver's license and credit cards untouched. There was no sign of Michael. The search began immediately. Volunteer firefighters, police officers and citizens combed the dense woods surrounding Hawks Peak. Search dogs followed trails that seemed to lead nowhere. Helicopters scanned from above, their rhythmic chopping sounds echoing through the valley for days. "We knew something was wrong," recalled James Bentley, a fellow firefighter who participated in the search. "Mike wouldn't just walk away. He lived for his family and for the department." On the third day of searching, October 20th, the community's worst fears were realized. Michael's body was found at the bottom of a steep ravine, nearly a mile from where his truck had been parked. The fall alone could have killed him, investigators initially thought. But the autopsy revealed a more sinister truth. Michael Harrigan had been shot twice in the chest before his body was pushed over the edge. The news hit Millbrook like a physical blow. Children were kept indoors. Doors that had rarely been locked in this tight-knit community were now secured day and night. The funeral drew nearly the entire town. Over 2,000 people crowded into and around St. Mary's Church to pay their respects to the fallen firefighter. As the initial shock wore off, questions mounted. Who would want to kill Michael Harrigan, a man with no known enemies? Why lure him to Hawks Peak, or had he gone there willingly to meet someone? Was it a random act of violence, or something more calculated? The investigation began in earnest. Detectives from the Pennsylvania State Police joined local law enforcement. They interviewed family members, colleagues, friends. They examined Michael's financial records, phone calls, and daily routines. They canvassed the area around Hawks Peak, searching for witnesses who might have seen something unusual that Thursday morning. But leads were scarce. No unusual deposits or withdrawals in the Harrigans' bank accounts. No suspicious phone calls. No witnesses who had seen Michael or anyone else at the overlook that morning. Though a resident recalled seeing a green sedan driving away from the area around 9 a.m. Information that would prove crucial decades later. As weeks turned into months, the investigation stalled. The community remained vigilant, but life in Millbrook had to go on. Sarah returned to work at the hospital, her face a mask of composed grief. Emma and Jason went back to school, carrying the weight of their father's absence like stones in their pockets. Each year on October 17th, the Millbrook Volunteer Fire Department held a memorial service for Michael. Each year, Sarah and her children stood stoically as the bell rang out 15 times, one for each year of Michael's service. And each year, the case grew colder. "We never gave up," Chief Thornton, who retired in 2008, would later say. "But after a while you run out of places to look, people to question. We had nothing solid to go on." By 2001, a decade after Michael's murder, the case file had been relegated to the archives. The community had not forgotten. Michael's photo still hung prominently in the firehouse, but hope for resolution had dimmed to a faint glimmer. Sarah had moved with her children to her parents' home in Ohio, unable to bear the weight of memories and unanswered questions that filled their Millbrook house. No one could have predicted that it would take more than 3 decades for justice to finally begin its slow, grinding process. January 2023 arrived in Millbrook with a bitter, cold snap that froze the small Pennsylvania town to its core. The fire station, renovated twice since Michael Harrigan's murder, still displayed his photograph, now yellowed with age, beside the plaque commemorating his service. Most of the firefighters now were too young to have known him personally, but they all knew his story. It had become part of Millbrook's dark folklore, a cautionary tale about violence invading even the most peaceful communities. Detective Samantha Reed wasn't from Millbrook. At 38, she joined the Pennsylvania State Police Cold Case Unit only 3 years earlier, drawn to the work by a fascination with unsolved mysteries and a deep-seated belief that time should not absolve anyone of their crimes. On that frigid January morning, she sat at her desk in Harrisburg, methodically working through a stack of case files, when her supervisor dropped a weathered box on her desk. "Harrigan," he said simply. "Firefighter, 1991. Millbrook. It's been assigned to us for review as part of the Forensic Genetic Genealogy Initiative. The initiative, funded by a federal grant, aimed to revisit cold cases using advanced DNA technology and genealogical databases, tools that hadn't existed when Michael Harrigan was murdered." Reed opened the box, the musty smell of old paper rising to greet her. Inside were hundreds of pages of interviews, forensic reports, photographs, and evidence logs. She began to read, reconstructing the life and death of a man she had never known. What caught her attention immediately was a single piece of evidence that had been collected but never fully processed. A weathered green canvas jacket found approximately 200 yards from Michael's body. It had been raining the day before his murder, and the jacket was caked with mud. Investigators in 1991 had noted it in their reports, but found no clear connection to Michael, who had been wearing his firefighter's jacket when his body was discovered. DNA testing at the time had been rudimentary, expensive, and often inconclusive. The jacket had been logged into evidence and essentially forgotten. "This is where we start," Reed told her partner, Detective Marcus Williams, pointing to the evidence log. "Let's find out if this jacket is still in storage and what it might tell us." The jacket was located in an evidence warehouse in Pittsburgh. When Reed and Williams opened the sealed box, they found it exactly as described in the reports. A mud-stained canvas jacket, size large, with a tear in the right sleeve. Modern forensic techniques allowed them to extract DNA from multiple areas: the collar, cuffs, and a small bloodstain on the inner lining that had gone unnoticed in 1991. The DNA profile didn't match Michael Harrigan, confirming the original investigators' assumption that the jacket didn't belong to the victim. When run through CODIS, the national DNA database, no matches were found. But the Forensic Genetic Genealogy Initiative offered another path forward. Working with a private lab specializing in genetic genealogy, the DNA profile was uploaded to public genealogy databases where individuals voluntarily share their DNA profiles to find relatives. The process was painstaking, building family trees and narrowing down possibilities based on age, location, and opportunity. By March 2023, they had a promising lead. The DNA likely belonged to someone related to the Campbell family, who had deep roots in western Pennsylvania. The family tree was extensive, with branches spreading across multiple counties. Reed and Williams began the methodical work of elimination, focusing on male Campbells who would have been in their 20s to 40s in 1991 and had connections to Millbrook. One name kept surfacing, Gerald Campbell, 62, who now lived in Erie, Pennsylvania. In 1991, he had been 30 years old and worked as a paramedic in a neighboring county to Millbrook. More significantly, he had briefly been employed at Millbrook General Hospital in 1990, where Sarah Harrigan worked as a nurse. "We need to look deeper into Campbell," Reed told her supervisor. "There's something here." Background checks revealed that Campbell had left his paramedic job abruptly in late 1991, relocating to Ohio for several years before returning to Pennsylvania. He had no criminal record, had been married and divorced twice, and currently worked as a pharmaceutical sales representative. Nothing in his background immediately screamed murderer, but the coincidences were too significant to ignore. Reed and Williams began quietly interviewing people who had known both Campbell and Michael Harrigan in 1991. Most remembered Campbell vaguely, if at all, just another medical professional in a small community hospital. But one retired nurse, Elizabeth Klein, provided a crucial piece of information. "I remember Gerald had a thing for Sarah," Klein told the detectives in her assisted living apartment. "It was uncomfortable. He would find reasons to be on her floor, bring her coffee, offer her rides home. Sarah was always polite but firm. She was devoted to Michael." Further investigation revealed that Campbell had called in sick to his paramedic job on October 17, 1991, the day of Michael's disappearance. His cell phone records from that period, while incomplete, showed he had been in the vicinity of Millbrook that morning. In April 2023, Reed and Williams obtained a warrant to collect a DNA sample from Gerald Campbell. They traveled to Erie, approaching him outside his apartment building as he returned from work. "Mr. Campbell," Reed said, showing her badge, "we'd like to ask you some questions about a cold case we're investigating." Campbell's face remained impassive, but Reed, who had interviewed hundreds of suspects over her career, noticed the slight stiffening of his shoulders, the barely perceptible quickening of his breath. "What case would that be?" he asked. "The murder of Michael Harrigan in 1991. For a moment, just a flicker, something dark passed behind Campbell's eyes. Then he nodded, his composure returning. "I vaguely remember hearing about that tragic situation, but I don't see how I could help you. We're collecting DNA samples from various individuals as part of our investigation," Williams explained. "Would you be willing to provide a sample?" Campbell hesitated, then shrugged. "I suppose so. Though I don't understand what this has to do with me." The DNA sample was rushed to the lab. 5 days later, the results confirmed what Reed and Williams had suspected. Gerald Campbell's DNA matched the profile extracted from the green canvas jacket found near Michael Harrigan's body in 1991. But DNA on an abandoned jacket wasn't enough for an arrest. They needed more. Reed returned to the original case files, this time with a specific suspect in mind. She found a statement from a witness who reported seeing a green sedan near Hawks Peak the morning of the murder. Campbell, according to vehicle registration records from 1991, had owned a green 1989 Ford Taurus. The detectives also discovered through Michael's phone records that he had received a call from a payphone near the hospital the morning of his disappearance. Elizabeth Klein, when shown a photograph of the payphone location, remembered seeing Campbell use it occasionally when he didn't want to use the hospital phones. The case was building piece by piece. In May 2023, Reed and Williams presented their evidence to the district attorney, who authorized a search warrant for Campbell's apartment and vehicle. The search yielded one final, damning piece of evidence. Hidden in a storage unit rented by Campbell was a box containing newspaper clippings about Michael's murder and a firefighter's challenge coin, identical to one Michael was known to carry, but that had never been found with his body. On May 23, 2023, 32 years after Michael Harrigan's murder, Gerald Campbell was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The news exploded through Millbrook like a thunderclap, reopening old wounds and bringing long-buried emotions rushing back to the surface. The courtroom in the Warren County Courthouse fell silent as Gerald Campbell was led in, handcuffed and wearing an orange jumpsuit that seemed to hang loosely on his frame. At 62, he looked older than his years, his hair completely grey, deep lines etched around his eyes and mouth. Those who had known him in 1991 would have struggled to recognize the young paramedic in this diminished figure. It was February 12, 2024, the first day of what would become one of the most closely watched trials in Pennsylvania's recent history. The case had captured national attention. A 32-year-old cold case solved through genetic genealogy, a respected firefighter finally receiving justice, a community confronting its darkest chapter. Sarah Harrigan, now 67, sat in the front row, her adult children, Emma and Jason, beside her. They had flown in from Ohio, where they had built new lives after leaving Millbrook decades earlier. Sarah's hair was silver now, her face lined with years of grief, but her posture remained straight, her gaze unwavering as she looked at the man accused of destroying her family. "All rise," called the bailiff as Judge Eleanor Martinez entered the courtroom. The trial of Commonwealth of Pennsylvania versus Gerald Campbell had begun. District Attorney Victoria Patel outlined the prosecution's case in her opening statement. "For 32 years, she told the jury, Gerald Campbell walked free while the Harrigan family lived in the prison of unresolved grief. For 32 years, he built a life while denying Michael Harrigan the chance to see his children grow up. The evidence will show that on October 17, 1991, Gerald Campbell lured Michael Harrigan to Hawks Peak under false pretenses, shot him twice in the chest, and pushed his body into a ravine, all because of an obsession with Michael's wife, Sarah. Campbell's defense attorney, James Whitaker, countered with arguments about the reliability of DNA evidence after so many years and the circumstantial nature of much of the prosecution's case. "The state is asking you to convict a man based on DNA found on a jacket that could have been dropped by anyone at any time," he argued. "They're asking you to believe that my client harbored a deadly obsession for decades without any other violent incidents in his life." Deal. Over the next 3 weeks, the prosecution methodically built its case. Detective Samantha Reed testified about the discovery of the jacket and the DNA evidence linking Campbell to the scene. Retired nurse Elizabeth Klein, now 85, and testifying via video from her nursing home, recounted Campbell's inappropriate attention towards Sarah Harrigan. Forensic experts explained how modern DNA technology allowed them to extract and analyze genetic material that would have been impossible to process in 1991. A cell phone expert testified that Campbell's phone had pinged towers near Millbrook on the morning of the murder, contradicting his initial claim to detectives that he had been homesick that day. Perhaps the most damning testimony came from Campbell's former roommate, Trevor Delaney, who had not been interviewed during the original investigation. "Jerry came home late that night, October 17th, Delaney testified. His clothes were muddy. He said he'd gone hiking and fallen. He burned those clothes in our backyard fire pit the next day. I didn't think anything of it at the time." When asked why he hadn't come forward earlier, Delaney's response was simple: "No one ever asked me." The defense tried to create reasonable doubt by suggesting other potential suspects who had been overlooked, questioning the chain of custody for evidence stored for over 3 decades, and highlighting Campbell's otherwise law-abiding life. They called character witnesses who described him as quiet, private, but never violent or obsessive. On the trial's fourth day, the prosecution revealed their final piece of evidence: Michael Harrigan's firefighter challenge coin found in Campbell's storage unit. Sarah Harrigan identified it on the stand, her voice breaking as she described the distinctive scratch on its surface, a mark created when Michael had used it to teach young Jason how to flip a coin. He carried it everywhere, she testified. It was his good luck charm. The defense countered that Campbell could have acquired the coin innocently over the years, perhaps at a flea market or estate sale, but the explanation felt hollow in the face of Sarah's emotional testimony. On March 5, 2024, after 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Campbell showed no visible reaction as the verdict was read, his expression as impassive as it had been throughout the trial. In the gallery, Sarah Harrigan closed her eyes briefly, her children gripping her hands on either side. 2 weeks later, at the sentencing hearing, Campbell was given the opportunity to speak. For the first time, he addressed the court and the Harrigan family directly. "I've lived with this for 32 years, he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "I didn't plan to kill him. I just wanted to talk to him, to tell him to appreciate what he had. I loved Sarah. I thought she could love me too, if Michael wasn't in the picture." He paused, then added, "I've been in a prison of my own making all these years. I almost wish they had caught me sooner." Judge Martinez sentenced Campbell to life in prison without the possibility of parole, the maximum penalty for first-degree murder in Pennsylvania. "No sentence can restore what was taken from the Harrigan family," she said, "but perhaps it can provide a measure of closure and justice, however delayed." Outside the courthouse, as a light spring snow fell over Millbrook, Sarah Harrigan addressed the media briefly. "Michael can rest now," she said simply, "and so can we." In the days that followed, Millbrook began the process of healing old wounds. The volunteer fire department held a memorial service that drew hundreds, including firefighters from across the state. Chief Robert Thornton, now 85, rang the bell for his old friend one last time. Emma and Jason Harrigan, now in their 40s with children of their own, visited their childhood home in Millbrook, a house now owned by a young family with 2 small children. They walked through the town where they had spent their early years, retracing their father's steps and reclaiming pieces of memory that had been overshadowed by tragedy. Detective Samantha Reed returned to her office in Harrisburg, where another stack of cold case files awaited her attention. The Harrigan case had reminded her why this work mattered, not just for the dead, but for those left behind, carrying the weight of unanswered questions. In the Millbrook Volunteer Fire Department, Michael's photograph was moved to a newly created memorial wall alongside other fallen firefighters. Beneath it, in a small glass case, lay a replica of his challenge coin, a reminder that some bonds remain unbroken even across decades. And in a small ceremony attended only by the Harrigan family, Sarah scattered some of Michael's ashes at Hawks Peak, not where his body had been found, but at the overlook itself, where the view stretched for miles across the Pennsylvania countryside. It was an act of reclamation, transforming a place of death into one of remembrance and peace. "He would have wanted us to remember the beauty, not the darkness," she told her children and grandchildren, as the ashes caught the wind and drifted out over the valley below. 32 years after a senseless act of violence tore apart a family and shook a community to its core, justice had finally come to Millbrook. The case of firefighter Michael Harrigan, once a painful reminder of unsolved tragedy, had become a testament to persistence, to advances in forensic science, and to the enduring pursuit of truth, no matter how much time has passed. For Detective Reed, for the Millbrook community, and especially for the Harrigan family, the resolution brought a profound lesson: that no case is ever truly cold as long as someone remembers, someone cares, and someone keeps searching for answers.